Good morning, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and a very warm welcome to this plenary event as part of the Myanmar Week here in Parma. Our topic for this morning is human rights and international law, the duty of commitment.
Okay.
My name is Michael Marriott Crosby. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Su Foundation and the Chair of Trustees of Prospect Burma. I've been involved in humanitarian assistance in Myanmar for the last 20 or so years. It's my great pleasure to be moderating this session this morning. I apologize for the fact that I can only speak about 10 words of Italian. I learnt Latin at university, but it seems the language has moved on, rather. So I apologize for that. We're going to begin today with a series of expert witnesses who are going to address the core topic of today's event. We have some of those expert witnesses in the room, including, of course, Minister U Aung Myo Min from the National Unity Government. We have other witnesses online. Some of our witnesses will be speaking in Italian and others in English. There's been some changes inevitably to the programme this morning, but we're going to start with our first online witness. I'm delighted to be able to welcome Mr. Michele Guerra, Municipal Councillor for Culture of the City of Parma. Mr. Guerra, good morning. And
Thank you very much.
I shouldn't welcome you to your own city, but it's lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much. Allora, come avete ascoltato, abbiamo deciso di parlare ognuno nella propria lingua, avendo la possibilità degli interpreti, quindi il mio è un saluto, un benvenuto e una piccola riflessione su quello che significa questa settimana. Questa settimana parte da una idea che affonda le sue radici nella estate del 2017, quando mentre scrivevamo il dossier di Parma, capitale italiana della cultura, avevamo in testa di costruire un cantiere, così lo abbiamo chiamato, intitolato Cultura e Democrazia. La convinzione profonda di quel progetto era che non potesse esistere una programmazione culturale che non si ponesse nel modo più profondo il tema e il problema della crisi delle democrazie. In un momento storico che la pandemia ha reso naturalmente ancora più complesso, il nostro obiettivo era quello di fare in modo che accanto a tutta la programmazione culturale, in un tempo più sereno di quello che abitiamo oggi, in un tempo che naturalmente fa della cultura lo spazio per il confronto, per lo scambio e per il dialogo, potesse esistere questo spazio di riflessione alta sui valori della democrazia. Quando sotto i portici del grano del municipio abbiamo ospitato una mostra importante, di cui ringrazio Albertina Sogliani, che raccontava proprio la crisi del Myanmar, ecco, in quella giornata, ascoltando il discorso di Albertina, ascoltando il discorso degli intervenuti, abbiamo pensato che questo cantiere Cultura e Democrazia potesse avere come focus la crisi del Myanmar. La crisi del Myanmar che diventava un caso di studio utile per diverse ragioni. Prima di tutto per l'importanza che questa cultura ha per la nostra città e per l'importanza che la riflessione che si fa nella nostra città sta avendo in quel paese. Stamattina Albertina Sogliani mi diceva: Parma è al centro in questi giorni di una discussione molto sentita in quelle terre, che in qualche modo fa avvertire una vicinanza che non è simbolica, che non è soltanto collegata alle parole che possiamo dire qui, ma che è invece molto vincolata ad un'azione che può avvenire proprio a partire da questa settimana di discussioni. Noi abbiamo una convinzione profonda che oggi non si possa semplicemente riflettere e ragionare su ciò che accade nel nostro piccolo intorno, ma che gli equilibri globali, che i temi di politica estera debbano essere al centro di una agenda culturale completa. Una città, anche una città come Parma, non può pensare di essere estromessa da un dibattito internazionale che ormai vede tutto collegato, che laddove si accende una spia, laddove si accende una crisi, laddove la cultura viene messa in discussione e con essa la democrazia, perché sono due ambienti molto collegati, ecco, immediatamente esistono delle ricadute anche qui. Quando è morto Gino Strada, mi è capitato di ascoltare, tra le tante frasi che si ripetevano in quei mesi attorno alla sua figura, una che mi ha colpito in maniera molto forte, una frase in cui Gino Strada diceva: noi abbiamo il privilegio di poter essere utili da subito. Noi viviamo in una situazione di privilegio che ci permette di poter essere immediatamente utili, di non avere dei pensieri, delle costrizioni, delle coercizioni, delle limitazioni della nostra libertà che in qualche modo si frappongono alla possibilità di costruire qualcosa di utile agli altri. Noi oggi viviamo questa situazione che ci consente di poter immaginare lo spazio per una discussione a cui segua poi un'azione concreta. Io credo che i rapporti di amicizia tra Italia e Birmania in questi anni abbiano dimostrato questo: la capacità di una riflessione fatta nei nostri luoghi, nella nostra cultura, nel nostro mondo, e però ad essa collegare immediatamente il desiderio e la volontà di portare un'azione fuori. Il cantiere Cultura e Democrazia parte così quest'anno con una forma molto ambiziosa, internazionale. Non avremmo mai pensato di poter avere degli ospiti così importanti, e di giovarci anche della grande possibilità che naturalmente i collegamenti digitali e telematici ci offrono. Forse se avessimo fatto questa cosa in un tempo pre-Covid avremmo semplicemente lavorato sugli ospiti in presenza e avremmo perso qualcosa. Oggi abbiamo veramente la sensazione di stare dentro un dibattito importante e di stare dentro un dibattito globale, e questo è il primo passo. Ogni progetto che noi abbiamo pensato per Parma Capitale Italiana della Cultura veniva vagliato con una domanda molto semplice: questo progetto può dare dei frutti da qui in avanti o resta semplicemente confinato dentro questo anno, o resta semplicemente confinato dentro questo programma? Se il progetto può dare dei frutti, se il progetto può avere una prospettiva lunga, un passo diverso, allora può stare dentro la programmazione. Il cantiere Cultura e Democrazia ha a pieno diritto la possibilità di stare dentro questa prospettiva e soprattutto coinvolge una serie di istituzioni in questa sua prima edizione che potranno continuare a lavorare insieme. L'Istituto Cervi, il Comune di Parma, l'Università di Parma, l'Associazione per l'Amicizia Italia-Birmania sono tutte realtà che potranno continuare, insistendo su questo territorio, a costruire spazi di discussione come questo. Quindi io sono estremamente orgoglioso che il cantiere Cultura e Democrazia abbia preso questo spazio, perché è lo spazio della discussione, del confronto, delle voci anche diverse, che è bene che ci siano e che è bene che si possano confrontare. E respiriamo in questi giorni giorni, ieri all'università, oggi qui nel corso della settimana in tante altre sedi, quella libertà che in qualche modo è l'opposto, come vedete nel titolo, della paura che invece certe volte ci costringe a non riunirci, a non parlare, a pensare che le questioni sia meglio accantonarle e non affrontarle di petto. Quindi io ringrazio tutti i nostri ospiti che hanno deciso di raggiungerci sia in collegamento che in presenza a Parma in questa settimana. Ringrazio gli organizzatori che, credetemi, hanno messo in piedi qualcosa di estremamente difficile da organizzare e da seguire, e mi auguro a me e auguro alla nostra città che questo sia il primo passo per un appuntamento annuale, quello del cantiere cultura e democrazia, che ci aiuti veramente a crescere, sapendo che siamo parte di una rete che si dà soltanto nel collegamento, nella connessione e nella completezza delle informazioni che siamo in grado di veicolare. Grazie.
Mr. Guerra, thank you very much indeed for joining us in person this morning and for beginning our session with that core insight that the undermining of democracy, wherever it happens in the world, matters to us all. I think that's a core point with which to begin our reflections. Our second expert witness joining us now online is Benedetto Della Vedova, Under-Secretary of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm hoping that he will be able to speak now. I think, as is commonly the case in such events, the business of government takes speakers in strange directions. We may be able to come back to hear from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rome a little bit later in our presentations. We will move then to our first Myanmar witness. I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you this morning His Excellency Professor Win Myat A, who is the Minister of Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Management in the National Unity Government. Professor Win Myat A was previously a minister in the Democratic Government of 2015, and sir, we are delighted to have you as one of our expert speakers today. Thank you.
Sta parlando lui? Noi non lo vediamo qui però, l'immagine qui è ferma.
I think we will need to take a moment just to connect ourselves.
Lui sta parlando? Because he is talking, but we can't see the other image. Okay. We cannot hear.
Okay. I think that while we fix the online connection to His Excellency Dr. Win Myat A, we might move to somebody who we know can talk because he's sitting next to me in the room. It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce His Excellency Minister Aung Myo Min, who is the Minister for Human Rights in the National Unity Government, the first ever Minister of Human Rights in the history of Myanmar. Sir, we're delighted to have you with us today. Please.
Thank you so much. Very nice to meet you all, and honored to be here representing the National Unity Government. As our moderator mentioned about me, I'm the Minister of Human Rights. For the first time ever, taking their possession at the union level of Myanmar. So I'm really glad to see that all our friends who are showing solidarity with the people of Myanmar and great interest learning about our human rights situation in the country, particularly seeing young people here, because it is great pressure. Young generation from this country are learning what's going on the same age of the people inside our countries. You are sitting here, but many young people like your age in my countries are struggling, fleeing, and fighting, protesting everywhere where they are, and calling for democracy and human rights. So I'm glad to see that Generation Z, we proudly call, have a strong, solidarity. You are indifferent in location, age, and country, but young generation and people from Italy and people from Myanmar, we all love democracy. We all respect human rights. So thank you for joining today. So as a Ministry of Human Rights, my job is very huge. It's, because Myanmar is known for long history of human rights violations. And then, since the military coup, it's already been 8 months. The human rights situations, violations is taking place every day, every night, everywhere in our country. So I like to give some glimpse of the human rights situation in my country. As of November 13, at least 1,260 civilians has been killed by the military. Many of them are children and even women and young girls. At least 7,251 people were in detention. They are behind the bars. The reasons is they call for human rights and democracy. Many of them were arrested on the street while they are demonstrating. Many of them are arrested while they are hiding in their place when military came to the communities. And there's another 65 people being sentenced to death, including 2 children who are under 18 years old, because they led the peaceful demonstration in Myanmar, particularly in Yangon. They did not have any legal rights to defend. They are tried at the military tribunal without any defense. They have no chance to defend their cases. So this is by the military tribunal without any fair trial. But these 65 people, including young children, are now being sentenced to death. And many people, including artists, doctors, engineers, and many lawyers, their warrants, arrest warrants was issued. Though they are in great danger of arrest because they are on the list of warrant. There are about 2,000 people are in the warrant list. So they are displaced because they cannot stay at home. They are living in the hiding places, safe houses. Sometimes they went to the border for their liberation and for their freedom. So situation is very difficult situation. I would say Myanmar is the country where 2-year-old child was arrested and detained because police could not find her father, who was a civil disobedient movement staff. That means that he did not report to the government, so he decided not to cooperate. So the youngest political prisoners of Myanmar is only 2 years old. And Myanmar is a country where many medical workers are arrested because they provide COVID coronavirus masks to the people. Myanmar is a country where thousands of people are living in displaced, in IDP, internally displaced person, because the whole villages will burn down. So this is the current situation. So that's why I'm saying that all these kind of crimes, violations by the military, from judicial killing, sexual violence, arbitrary arrest, and mass destruction against the civilians, it's comprise crime against humanity. I would say this is crime against humanity because these crimes are widespread and very systematically organized by the military. And this is not random act by the soldier. They have been directed against civilians by the military command, who was led by the general, the big general of the army. And they have been conducted this kind of crimes with the knowledge and at the order of the military junta leaders. So all the crimes taking place of massive arrest, detention, destructions are entitled crime against humanity. So as a Ministry of Human Rights, as a national unity government who stand for justice, could not just watch and see. We take some actions because we are the people government fighting for justice and human rights. So our ministry, the NUG, have made several reports of the human rights situation to let the world know that the crime against humanity, war crime, and genocide in the countries are taking place. And we call for the international action, for intervention, to stop the military committing this kind of human rights so we can save the people from that kind of atrocities across the country. Also, for justice, you know that we have International Criminal Court, known as ICC. This is the criminal court for the criminals who committed this kind of crimes. So, showing our commitment for justice and accountabilities, on last July 17 of this year, we sent our letter and using the jurisdiction of 12.3 that we showing our cooperation, willingness to cooperate with the International Criminal Court to make sure the human rights perpetrators be accountable at the International Criminal Court. Also, NUG is cooperating the human rights situation at the International Court of Justice for the genocide cases. So this is our commitment to protect the people of Myanmar and to make the perpetrators, particularly the military, be accountable and be responsible for all the crimes they have committed. So I'm here to just not only just telling what's going on in the country, I really want to get your support and solidarity in different levels. We can do people to people, like a youth to youth, young people to young people, people to people, to show your support inside the country by making all kinds of campaigns, all kinds of, public demonstration. So glad here we have, 4 days, full pack of activities to show support. And I'd like to call your attention that coming December 10, this is a Universal Human Rights Day. This is the day when Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. So NUG is preparing a global action on that day. So I would like to get your, solidarity messages, solidarity videos, solidarity posts, showing your solidarity with the people, particularly the civilian inside the country on that day. Also, please take up your voice louder with your politicians, with the government, to support the NUG as the only one and legitimate government, and making your parliament move forward for a bill that recognizes the NUG and the CRPH, which is a representative of the election of the last election. So I want to take a pause because my moderator will have so many questions for me to ask because I cannot run away. I cannot excuse. This is a technical problem. So I will pause here and thank you for your coming here and thank you for your strong support from your beautiful and cultured city. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Your Excellency, and you are indeed our captive answer of every question that's going to come. And just to alert you that I will be really interested to take questions from the floor. I know some of the young people who are with us today have prepared some questions, and we will try to answer or at least engage with as many of those questions as possible during this session. I think we are now able to bring in an online witness, the Honourable Benedetto della Vedova, the Under-Secretary of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rome. Your Excellency, good morning. I hope you're able to contribute now. I think the technical issues continue to bedevil us. We'll just take a moment to see if they can be resolved. Otherwise, you're going to get a question, Minister, very soon.
Sure.
I wonder if while we are waiting for the technical issues to be resolved, we have the Minister here with us. Would anybody like to ask an initial question of the Minister in response to anything he said? Is anybody feeling brave to ask a first question? In which case, perhaps, Minister, I could ask you a question. You mentioned the International Criminal Court, and you indicated that the NUG has made a declaration under Article 12, Section 3. What do you hope for, sir, from international justice? What is it you are looking for from the court?
Thank you. This is the first initiative taken by the NUG. Sorry. Yeah. So, but you know that Myanmar is not the signatory of the Rome Statute. So we cannot directly refer the cases to the ICC because we are not the member state. So ICC cannot refer the cases because in other way, the UN Security Council has not referred the cases to that. These are the two possible way of bringing justice at the ICC. That is the first initiative, using jurisdiction of the Article 12, Section 3. This is a possible way. This is a great evidence that NUG is calling for justice and defending the rights of the people inside the country. So by calling that one, the ICC can take the cases of all the atrocity taking place inside the country. They can come and they can investigate. And they can even open a legal case against the perpetrators. And if the case is strong, there's other follow-up actions like arrest, warrant, or sentence for that. So what we hope to see is the International Criminal Court can start investigate with the information we collected. Then the long process is a due process for investigation and processing of the cases. And then we have strong evidence of the crimes that is entitled to be handled by the ICC. So that is the one way to bring the generals from Myanmar to face the international criminal law and face the kind of crimes that they committed. So this is where we are bringing justice to the people inside the country.
Thank you very much, Minister. It is important, I think, for the young people here particularly to note that this International Criminal Court procedure is a complex one. As the Minister said, Myanmar is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, but by applying, as the Minister said, for the jurisdiction of the court, the NUG has done something really extraordinary and important in the human rights of Myanmar. Now, I think we have some questions from the floor at this point, while the technical issues are resolved. Who has a question?
Okay, as you talked about the role of students in the fight for democracy, and also as students ourselves, we wanted to ask about the role of school in Myanmar right now, and how's the army involved in the school. Thank you.
Thank you. In the history of Myanmar, students always play a very important role. Like myself, I'm not a student right now, but my heart of student is always with me because I was a student during 1988 uprising. This is the 1988 uprising, nationwide uprising calling for democracy. So I was a student, and many students are spearheaded the demonstration. Because of the students' leadership, the nationwide uprising taken place in 1988. Again, this year, when military staged a coup, attempt to stage a coup, I would say, because the coup is not successful, students and young people are the first one to show their dismay, to show their opposition. They are the first one who came out on the street, bravely faced that kind of illegal attempt of military coup. The students are very important. And military know that students are, and young people are the most powerful people in the country. So they don't dare open a school. Because when the university opened, students were gathered and on the strike up again. This always happened. So that is one reason. they did not open their university, and even they opened it, students did not return because this is showing they don't trust military. So that kind of movement is quite strong. And then the many young people this time join in different ways. They are the state strike leaders all across the country. They also the member of the civil disobedience movement, and they all are along the border of liberation army, liberated areas, and calling for defensive, forces. So they are everywhere. They are fighting. So this is the reason. And I'm proud to say that our NUG also respect the young people. So you can see that one of our ministers in the cabinet, she was only 24 years old. She is the youngest deputy minister, and her background is the student activist, and she was the leader of the strike after the military coup. So this is how we respect, and we know the power of the students. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. It is an important question. Young people have always played an extraordinary part in activism on the streets in Myanmar. It was very striking in 1988, as the Minister rightly references, that one of the clearest targets that the military had in their sights was the University of Yangon, and specifically the Student Union building, which I think was blown up with a landmine and remained just a kind of destroyed site at the entrance to the University of Yangon, a symbol of the efforts undertaken by the military to silence young people. Those efforts were not successful in 1988, and they've been entirely unsuccessful now. I think one of the things that I noticed running human rights and associated charities is the power that young people have through their online networks, through connections via their smartphones that the military has been unable to silence. And for what little it's worth, I think that is one of the principal differences between 1988 and now. In 1988, when even the Minister and I were young, we didn't have smartphones. We weren't able to communicate in ways that young people are able to do now. And I think, sir, that has made a critical difference, that those networks have not been silenced. So when ancient persons like myself complain that young people spend all their time on their phones, there is a virtue to that. And those networks of support have enabled young people to make an extraordinary contribution to the attempted coup so far and to the failure of the military to establish effective control over the country. I'm going to take a second question. Thank you for that. It was a good question. I'm going to take a second question from the floor if there is one. Thank you.
Io avrei molte domande e molte curiosità. Potrei iniziare dal chiedere, ma in parte mi avete già dato una risposta, come sta la popolazione civile, come si è organizzata, che aiuti sta ricevendo dai paesi vicini del sud-est asiatico. Purtroppo le notizie sul Myanmar sono sempre molto scarne in Europa. Quando vogliamo sapere qualcosa dobbiamo proprio andare molto a cercarle, non a caso. In particolare però volevo sapere sui diritti umani se siete riusciti, se il nuovo governo è riuscito ad avere qualche approccio con la Cina. Abbiamo saputo che c'è stata una conferenza a cui del sud-est asiatico a cui il Myanmar nel governo dei militari non è stato accettato, credo che sia stato molto importante. Penso però che il ruolo della Cina in questa situazione sia fondamentale.
Thank you very much indeed. There's a number of questions there, and I'll try and split them up for you, Minister. I think you are in the hot spot once again. Let's start with thank you for those questions. Let's start with the lady's first question. How are the civilian population organising themselves in resistance to the military, and what support are they able to get from outside of the country? I think that was the first question. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for your great interest on Myanmar. And I also admit that information from Myanmar right here in Europe is not that hot spot like me here. So thank you for that. So, it's been 8 months. The military attempted a coup, but it did not successful. But Myanmar people is the most resilient people around the world, because they're still fighting against the military. There's a lot of challenges they face in terms of economy, job, and poverty, and also health situation. They are very much resilient how to survive, because they have strongly believe they could overcome fighting against the military. This is the hope. So I want to reframe your question. If, I wouldn't say when. We have we strongly believe that we are very determined and believe we will win. We will overcome this kind of thing because of the power of the people. The people are very committed, taking by all means possible to fight. So this is one of the difference between 1988 and right now. In 1988, after the military coup, there's no more demonstration after the brutal killing. But you can see many small demonstrations every day, led by women, young people, even the LGBT, every day on the street showing they are committed to fight the military until the end. So this is with the commitment they survive. And also, for the economy, this is another issue. Many people decide not to go back to the job because they don't want to cooperate. This is what we call civil disobedience movement. But where's the money came from? NUG, we cannot support all that staff, thousands of staff who lost job because they are on CDM. We try as much as we could to support the very many men support for their survival, but even that, it is not for everyone. But people are very resilient to make their own fun, own living, change the job, selling, things like that. So you can see that the university lecturers are now online shopping. And, high school teachers survive as a grocery, shop. So they find a job to survive because they have a strong confidence and they don't want to change their side. And now we have, in Myanmar, maybe because of our culture, we care each other. There's so many charity work, so many volunteer work to help each other, community to community, family to family. This is very good evidence during the first wave of COVID. Myanmar was a very underdeveloped country. Government did not have a good money to prevent the COVID situation, but these are the people who volunteer themselves and support, cooperate with the government by, sharing the masks, sharing some kind of, assistance and food, and even the temporary shelter for the COVID people by the community. So this is really, I'm so proud to be a people of Myanmar who care and who protect when it's need. So this is how they survive. But we don't know, there will be I don't know how long they can face that one. Even though they have a strong will, the situation is not sustainable to do that. That's why my request is, stop the military. It's the best way, the best solution to stop the military for holding power or attacking the people. If we can solve it, you can save people. You can save people in this kind of desperate situation. So that's why we call to support the people humanitarian ground and your government, the humanitarian assistance using the cross-border situation, and also some kind of, finding the third party who can deliver this kind of humanitarian assistance to the people while they are still fighting against the military.
Thank you very much, Minister. I wonder if I could just add a little bit, if I may, sir. Since the coup, the main work my organisations have been trying to do is to get humanitarian assistance into Myanmar. We have been trying to get aid, money, medical materials into the country in order to give those people who the Minister spoke about those kinds of essential support. Sometimes it works. People put their lives at risk to deliver medical and food supplies into Myanmar. But honestly, sometimes it doesn't. I've had members of my teams arrested. Some of them have lost their lives as a result of their efforts since the coup. We've seen humanitarian aid that we sourced, captured by the military and just burnt, food burnt in the town square in front of hungry people. That's the reality of humanitarian assistance. The Minister's right to accentuate the bravery of people who are making these incredibly hard decisions to confront what they see as illegal rule. We can talk more maybe later about how the international community can help. It's incredibly difficult in these circumstances to get the aid to where it's needed, but we will, Minister, continue to do what we can because of what he said about the willingness of people from across different cultures and generations to support each other in the face of the uprising. Now, I think, for the third time, we are going to try to bring in one of our online witnesses. So it's a pleasure, once again, I'm going to get his name pronounced right eventually, to introduce the Honourable Benedetto Della Vedova, Under-Secretary of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rome. Sir, good morning. So that was a false announcement once again. We are now delighted to be able to welcome, with a bit of luck, His Excellency Professor Win Myat-ae. Professor Win Myat-ae is a fellow minister with Uang Yumin. He is the Minister for Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management in the National Unity Government. He was also a minister under the democratic government from 2015. He and I had I had the huge privilege of being able to work with him while I was based in Naypyidaw. Dr. Win Myat-ae, good morning. I think we can only feel immense compassion for our technical supporters. These kinds of things are immensely difficult when they happen. I wonder, Minister, if we might just answer the lady's second question, if I may, Madam, which was your question about ASEAN. As many of you know, the ASEAN made an extraordinary decision. They decided not to allow Senior General Min Aung Hlaing to attend the meeting of ASEAN countries, the first time in ASEAN's history that they have not allowed a member state to participate in a plenary meeting. Your Excellency, I wonder if you would be able to comment on what you think you can hope for from ASEAN, the countries around Myanmar, at this extraordinary time. Thank you, sir.
ASEAN, the Association of the South Asian Nations, is a regional bloc like a EU in your areas, but totally different principle and also some kind of work. The ASEAN is known for the bringing regional security and economic development. So there's no issue or no room for human rights, rule of law, and democracy within the framework for quite a long time. But Myanmar is in South Asia country, so Myanmar became a member of the ASEAN. Since then, as a human rights activist at the time, before I joined the Ministry of the National Unity Government, I have been engaging with the ASEAN to raise the issue of human rights situation in the country. In terms of political prisoners, offensive against the ethnic people and the Rohingya people. But it's very frustrating because ASEAN has a policy of non-interference. Not member state issue should be brought to the region because this is the domestic affairs. Non-interference policies. Second one, human rights is not on the table of discussion. They want to shake hands and they want to have an economic development. So there was no room for human rights and democracy. But since Myanmar is in the ASEAN region, we need to engage it, make it stronger ASEAN. So recently there's a breakthrough action by the ASEAN. For the first time ever, and the very significant movement of the ASEAN, they decided not to invite the military to the regional summit, which all the ASEAN heads are invited, but except the military. So this is very breakthrough, very significant, because the ASEAN summit is where all the leaders came, show, and friendship and good relations. So this was the first time. Because of it, why it has happened? Because since the military, many countries, many international groups trying the best to intervene the situation. So some countries, make a global action at the UN. And some countries, they show interest on the ASEAN to support how ASEAN regional group can intervene the situation in Myanmar, because ASEAN is neighboring countries. The regional play better than the other international things, and the ASEAN is a member of that. So that's why there are lots of support for the ASEAN intervention. So ASEAN had appointed the first ever envoy to Myanmar. And the ASEAN has a great expectation. Their envoy can play a very important role, but their dream did not come. Instead of cooperating with the ASEAN, the military did not cooperate, did not invite, did not respect the son of the agreement, the son of the demands. We got five-point consensus recommendation by the ASEAN. So ASEAN was very, very feeling not so good, so they make a decision. So, and this is good for the ASEAN level. But Myanmar is also a neighbor of China. So ASEAN and China, this is a kind of message to the military that they cannot go like this without cooperation with the ASEAN, without the cooperation with the Son of the Suggestion by China. So this is the break. This is the kind of split of the relation between the military, ASEAN, as well as China. So China is a bit concerned about the current human rights situation, the lack of cooperation with the military. But they are not directly doing so much, but they are using, ASEAN is a proxy group that they can deal with that. But NUG, we know that regional stability is very important. We must have a good relation with every neighboring countries. So NUG is always, showing our cooperative, relation with any countries. But we want this neighboring country and China to see what is the future prosperity of the country. As long as military is in power, as long as military committing the human rights crimes like this, the regional stability is in great danger. And economic prosperity will not be possible. So we always say that, think about, if you really want the regional security and prosperity, think about the future. Think about the people of the country, and think about the government who are elected and supported by people. This is how we are phrasing our message and try to build the better relations. So this is how we are engaging with the ASEAN and China.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. I think there's been a number of really significant decisions. Chronologically, perhaps the first significant decision was that the United Nations General Assembly did not accept the credentials of the military. That was an important moment. They allowed the credentials of the previous NLD government to continue, and so Ambassador Chormotun, who's speaking online tomorrow, is able to continue as ambassador to Myanmar. That was important decision number one. Important decision number two, as the ministers correctly identified, is this extraordinary decision by ASEAN not to allow the senior general to attend the meeting of leaders. ASEAN, as the minister said, is fundamentally an economic bloc. When Myanmar's GDP is estimated this year to fall by 16%, that's an extraordinary shrinkage of the economy. That threatens both economic and political security across the region. And it's particularly important, as the minister says, for Myanmar's neighbours, for China, for India, for Thailand, for Laos. To have a country with that amount of instability on your border creates huge pressures for refugee populations, and we've seen that already. It also creates massive pressures in the management of COVID. We may be able later, who knows, to bring in online somebody who really understands this issue of COVID. But COVID does not respect political borders. And if Myanmar is unable to manage COVID, that is an existential threat to the countries bordering it. So you can't keep a crisis like Myanmar's within boundaries. It doesn't work. That's why this crisis matters so much. Minister, I think what we are going to do now is take a short break to allow the internet system to be switched off and on again, I suppose, is the old-fashioned way of dealing with these things. It seems to work with my phone. So we're going to take a 10-minute break while we hopefully get the system up and running, because if my messages are anything to go by, all of our online witnesses are still standing by, and hopefully we'll be able to bring those in afterwards. If not, Minister, we have you here. Thank you all very much indeed.
Prova. 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 Prova, prova. Prova.
Posso entrare qua? Mi sentite? Riuscite a sentirmi?
Io mi sento, Clelia.
Bene.
E tu mi senti?
Io vi sento.
Ok, ottimo.
Buongiorno Flavia.
Buongiorno carissima.
Buongiorno.
Soprattutto vedi se riesci a sentire il collegamento con Myanmar.
Esatto. Minister Wimiae, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello.
I hear you perfectly.
Oh, yes, now I can hear you.
ဆရာကြားပါတယ်ဆရာအခုမှကြားပါပြီ
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Let me speak with the technician. Hold on.
Yes.
Thank you.
Be online with you, sir. I appreciate that chance.
Oh yes, I'm waiting. Thank you very much for your effort. Yeah, ông Nhung Minh. Yeah. ဟိုဒီ line ကပြတ်သွားမယ်ဆိုတခုခုဆိုရင်တရားဝင်ပြောကြည့်နော်အေးအခုအဲ့တရားပဲပြောရဆိုရတော့မှာအခုတိုင်းဆိုရင်တော့ကြည့်ရတာ
Okay, ရပါတယ်ဆရာစိတ်ချပါစိတ်ချပါဟုတ်
Ladies and gentlemen, exciting news. We seem to have fixed the problem. So many thanks to our technical team for getting that together. Look at this, we're back live, and our online witnesses are now with us. So I think we will give the Minister here a little bit of a break, but please stand by, sir, because who knows. And we will take two of our online witnesses now. Just to remind you that the issue we are discussing this morning is international law and human rights abuses in Myanmar, the duty of commitment that flows from witnessing such appalling abuses. I'm delighted to be able to welcome the Honourable Flavia Bustreo, former Assistant Director General for Family, Women's and Children's Health at the World Health Organization. Signora, good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope you can hear me well.
Very well indeed.
Thank you. Let me first start by thanking the organizer for giving an opportunity to be a witness to this special session on Myanmar. And my intervention is, of course, focused on the aspects of human rights that I'm most familiar with and I've worked most of my life. So I will focus primarily on the right to health and try to establish the right to health of the Myanmar population. How is it being protected and how could it be protected further through the action of the international community, which is witnessing this incredible situation. So let me start first by sharing with what is probably known by many, but when we talk about the right to health, historically, that was one of the key fundamental rights that was enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the Constitution of the World Health Organization in 1948. And the definition of the right to health is not merely the absence of disease, but is really an expansive definition that relates to a complete well-being status, both physical, mental, and social well-being. So this right is further protected in the International Covenant of Social, Economic, and Cultural Rights that came into being in 1966. And when we look at the application to Myanmar, was recently the subscription and addition of Myanmar to this covenant. Now, it's important to realize, and the colleagues here, I'm sure, are very well aware that the rights established rights for citizens of a country, but it's also important to note that in international instruments, there is an obligation for states that is also cooperation, and the states have to cooperate for the realization of the right to health of other citizens through the international organization like the World Health Organization and United Nations, but also through their development cooperation. So what we need to look at when assessing and advancing the right to health for Myanmar citizens is both what the state is doing, but also what the international community and the other states are doing. Now, why do I bring this issue to this audience? I think already in the initial exchange that I could hear, facilitator, there were questions about the health status of Myanmar population and a special concern concerning the health status of women, of children, of the elderly, of the most vulnerable part of the population. And there were, of course, incredible concerns for how COVID-19 has exacerbated that situation. So let me give just a few data just to for the audience to situate the Myanmar health situation, and then, of course, the colleague online will be more precise than me. But just to say that the data that we currently have from Myanmar from 2020 situates the country as a country which still has very high maternal, neonatal, and child mortality rate. For example, the child mortality rate data we have is 36 children or over 1,000 live births, and that, just to compare in the region, is far worse for that other countries like Cambodia that have 26 per thousand. So even before this crisis, political crisis and coup d'etat that we have witnessed, Myanmar is a country that has struggled to achieve a level of right to health for its own citizens and people from most vulnerable regions. And similarly, also maternal mortality rates are among some of the highest in the region and including in Europe, being at 286 per 100,000 live births. So we're looking at a country that already before the crisis had significant challenges to ensure the access to services that guarantee right to health to the most vulnerable population. Now, I think the audience also already asked some questions in relation to COVID-19. And clearly, COVID-19 has exacerbated the dramatic health situation present in Myanmar. And all the forecasts and projections are that these, for example, mortality rates will increase in 2021 because the COVID-19 has created a situation where barriers to the supply and to the demand of health services, because let's not forget, when there is a pandemic, population also reacts not asking for the health facility, being very afraid of accessing the facility, assessing, for example, for women, accessing family planning services, assessing antenatal care services, and assessing care at the time of delivery, which is the most risky one, both for mothers and for the newborn baby. So in the current situation, unfortunately, because as you alluded to during your intervention, because humanitarian aid is difficult to have access to, we currently have a situation where only 50% of the population is estimated to have received fully vaccinated by COVID-19, which is a significant gap, and of course will mean that the country remains unstable and remains a potential source of further outbreak and further dissemination of the virus in the region. Now, what I'd like to expand in the last few minutes of my intervention is what can the international community do more, and what are avenues that maybe the colleagues that are engaged could pursue. So number one, the humanitarian agencies that are included in the United Nations system to assist the countries that are under such a dire situation, like the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, UNICEF, WHO. Those organizations it's important that they are kept under constant observation and under constant demand. And even there were questions from young people, for example, that young people demand, what are these organizations doing? Because this is my experience when actually crises are protracted and the situation is difficult. These organizations tend to adjust to a status quo and are not being very proactive in what they can achieve. So number one, for the humanitarian organization, it's important that the international community, including like our states, like Italian state and associations like the ones that are organizing this conference, that we keep an eye on what are these organizations doing. Are they doing enough? Are they funding to do that? Are they willing to do that? And are they continuing to assist the vulnerable population? Now, there are also in the international community, there are also financing facilities that finance health. For example, for vaccine, the Global Alliance for Vaccine Immunization is the key alliance that is deputed, for example, now to the COVAX mechanism to facilitate access to vaccines. And then there is also a global financing facility that is in support of every woman, every child, of which Myanmar has been party and received financing in the recent year. So applying pressure on those financing mechanisms that can provide financial assistance is an important aspect to work on. And then when we look at the complex of the human rights, what the first special rapporteur for health and human rights, Professor Paul Hunt, refers to, he calls it the human rights archipelago of health and human rights, there are different avenues for advancing and supporting the right to health for the Myanmar population, especially the most vulnerable. Number one, there is a Committee on the Right of the Child, of which Myanmar is a party, and there can be submissions to that committee that are the so-called shadow solution by NGOs and by organizations that are working in Myanmar to bring that attention to that committee. And there is also a new rapporteur for health and human rights, Dr. Tlaleng, and the special rapporteur for health and human rights can, under special circumstances, focus on the country situation. So, for example, we could approach her and bring her the situation to her attention that maybe next year part or to be very focused on the right to health of Myanmar. And this, in my experience, has been a modality to bring attention, to keep the attention of the international community to this. Finally, let me make a comment, if I may, because this has been discussed and I had in mind to share it with the audience concerning the Asean and the Asean community. The Asean also has their Declaration of Human Rights as a specific article that is protecting the right to health, and there is a very a section that ensures that special protection should be accorded to mothers and to children, according to national law. So this the political acceptance of junta, I think, is extremely welcome. There could be maybe other avenues that explore Asian community can ensure protection of these rights for the most vulnerable in this country. Let me stop there, and I'm of course available for questions, and I remain very committed to assist in any way I can. I will be bringing up today in the afternoon, I'm part of the Global Financing Facility Investor Group, as it's called, and I will be bringing up the special situation and making the case for you. But it's always important that the national of the countries are the ones that raise the issues. Back to you, moderator, and I'm really glad we could be connected.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your input this morning, and I think particularly for raising those key issues around the financial mechanisms, around the modalities by which the international community can keep watching, looking, understanding the situations of refugees, and your point about ASEAN and its special clause of protection for mothers and children is a really interesting one that certainly is new to me, and we may well come back to that later. Thank you so much for your patience as well while we overcame the technical challenges. We're going to now hear from another of the ministers of the National Unity Government. In this instance, His Excellency Professor Win Myat-ae, the Minister for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Management. Professor Win Myat-ae was also a minister under the previous government, where he was Minister for Social Welfare. So he's been at the front line of delivering assistance for those very important years in Myanmar's history. Your Excellency, good morning.
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Right, this is person from all over. I want to extend sincere thanks and a great background for Myanmar's democracy justice.
Your Excellency, I do apologise. We are having some difficulties. We're going to call His Excellency Dr. Win Myat-ae in again in a few moments' time. I wonder, Minister, since we have you here as our captive, let me address, if I may, a couple of the questions that our previous witness spoke about. I mean, one is a very simple question that she raised about money. There are huge numbers of refugees, displaced people on the borders of Myanmar. Who is going to pay for that? I've been fundraising for Myanmar for at least 20 years. These are huge sums of money. We know there's been a very considerable commitment by the government of the United States, also by some other governments, including, I think importantly, the government of Italy. So where do you see the funds coming from which can address some of these humanitarian and human rights emergencies?
Very difficult question.
I know.
Because I'm not the financial person. I'm human rights. I always see the people as a human being. But some people see, where the money comes from to save the kind of human rights. But anyway, the displaced person or refugees, we have a long history of Burmese fleeing. Burmese, I mean all the ethnic people from Myanmar are fleeing across the country, across the border to Thailand, India, and huge number of Rohingya in Bangladesh. So internationally, the UN agency handling this issue is the UNHCR, of course. United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights is a UN agency, the main focal of handling the issue of refugees. But the money is the international support, international contribution with the big countries who are very committed to save the plight of the refugees and providing humanitarian assistance or maybe resettlement to the third countries, other countries. So these are the individual countries' contribution for the global refugee situations. So we need that kind of support, especially the countries who are very committed for the humanitarian ground and refugee issues. Things like, normally EU is one of the main contributors to the refugees issue, US, Australia, Canada, and these are the big major countries supporting that. But in practical, there's another issue of who will handle that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because it depends on the situation of the position of the neighboring countries. Even Bangladesh, India, Thailand, the policy on Myanmar refugees is not the same. In Thailand, they're not UNHCR recognized refugees, but relatively okay for the humanitarian INGOs providing assistance to the refugees along the border. And then Sometimes, the Thai authorities allow cross-border humanitarian assistance to reach to the people who are still stuck inside Myanmar. And India is another issue. The Indian allowed the UNHCR for protection and providing assistance to the refugees from Myanmar, but only in New Delhi, not along the border where now many of the refugees from Myanmar cross India. But Myanmar is a long boundary with northeast of India, which is another state, and they have a kind of autonomy with the local government. The Manipur, Mizoram, and also Nagaland has their own government and own states. Since the military coup, many people, thousands of people, especially from Chin State, became refugees in Mizoram state, including some of the military and police who defected to our side, and then also they went to India for the safety and security. So in that level right now, the Mizoram state governor is very kind and allowed any kind of assistance from any organizations to support. And they also give the shelter and some kind of protection as long as he could. So this is happening, but we really need to engage with the government of Thailand and India and Bangladesh for the UNHCR run programs that have a legitimacy and mandate to protect of the refugees along the border, so they can directly provide assistance and some kind of protection in all the borders. So money usually goes to the UNHCR when host country allow them to operate. But some issue like in Thailand, monies from different big countries, EU refugee funds, and also US, Australia, Canada, and some Australia also, give humanitarian assistance to the INGOs, the international humanitarian NGOs who are providing assistance along the border.
Thank you, sir. It was a difficult question, and you answered it brilliantly, if you don't mind my saying. There's a big issue about money. I've been involved in foreign aid for a long time, and foreign aid is very subject to fashion. Countries are fashionable. They come up in the world after 2011. Myanmar was very fashionable. We had, you remember this, sir,
yeah,
we had almost more money
yeah.
than we knew how to spend,
Right.
honestly, in those years. Right now, it's immensely difficult because the foreign aid system usually depends on government working with government. And when you have a situation where there either is no legitimate government or that government's not accepted, it becomes really complicated. I think it's important to note that many of the international donors, including the EU and the member states of the EU, have been really generous. Even my own country, which sadly, at least to me, decided to abandon the EU, has also been generous in its own way. So I think there is money, but getting that money to the border is really difficult. And getting that money to people in need in Myanmar is harder still. To try to, for example, reach vulnerable people in Yangon is incredibly difficult. I have a group of HIV clinics that we've been funding in Yangon for a quarter of a century now. Getting money to people living with HIV to enable them to buy the medication that keeps them alive is incredibly hard and involves now sending cash across the border in people's pockets, which is really dangerous for them to do. It's what we used to do. Some of us with long memories will remember this. It's what we used to do in the late 1980s. We are back to that now, and it's the only lifeline keeping, in this instance, young women, young men and children living with HIV alive in Yangon. Now, I wonder where we are with our online We're going to have another go. I'm not going to introduce him for the fourth time. You know his name now. Let's hope that we can hear from the Minister for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Management, Professor Win Myat-ae.
Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly, sir. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening again to everyone joining today's meeting. And I would like to extend my sincere thanks to everyone who made this important meeting possible. To elaborate a brief background on Myanmar's democracy landscape, as everyone here knows, the civilian government led by National League for Democracy won a landslide re-election in 2020. International observers agreed that the elections were free and fair. The outcome truly represented the will of the people of Myanmar. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Very clearly, sir. Thank you.
On the 1st of February this year, alleging electoral fraud with no concrete evidence, the military, led by Commander-in-Chief Main Aung Hlaing, staged a coup. The military detained members of the civilian government, including the president and the state councillor, as you all know, and many of the political leaders and other well-known pro-democracy activists all over the country. They declared a state of emergency and formed a gender, so-called SAC, State Administration Council, vesting all legislative, judicial, and executive power in themselves. Under Articles 417 and 18 of the Constitution of 2008, only the President can declare a state of emergency. By forcing the President to relinquish office and by detaining our leaders, the military has violated the very Constitution that they themselves claim to defend throughout its existence. The people of Myanmar roundly reject the coup. The gender has responded by brutal killings, detention, and torture. They have also passed a series of laws and amendments to the Penal Code, Criminal Procedure Code, Ward and Village Threat Administration Law, and law protecting the privacy and security of citizens, aiming to suppress the revolutionary movements of democracy alliances in various brutal and inhumane ways, permitting warrantless such as seizures, arrests, surveillance, and interception of communications and restricting freedom in Myanmar. None of their actions are compatible with the principle of international human rights law. Over the past 9 months, there have been increasing reports of gross human rights violations committed by the gender all over the country. His Excellency Wang Yu-min has also presented in details. As Minister for Humanitarian Affairs, I would like to frame this talk from the point of view of international humanitarian law. The international humanitarian law and international human rights law are two distinct but complementary bodies of law. They are both concerned with the protection of life, health, and dignity of human beings. The international humanitarian law applies in armed conflicts, while the human rights law is applicable at all times, in peacetime and in war. The rule of law under UN Convention requires international humanitarian law to be an indispensable prerequisite to
Okay, I think we have a little bit of a problem once again. Just to summarise what Professor Win Myat-ae was saying while we wait for him to rejoin, I think he'd made 3 points. I mean, the first point, which is really important to remember with regards to Myanmar, is there was an election in November 2020. Not a perfect election. I think many of us who were there at the time acknowledge that. But an election that was recognized as broadly free and fair by the international observers and the independent domestic monitors. That election produced a result. On the 1st of February, the Myanmar military, using, to be honest, spurious claims under articles in the 2008 Constitution, seized power. I think what the minister was then going on to say was that international humanitarian and human rights law demands a response. Now, during the early weeks of the coup, the minister will remember this very well, young people on the streets holding up signs calling for United Nations intervention, calling for, I remember one wonderful sign which said, "Where is the World Army?" Well, there is no World Army, and there was never any likelihood of a peacekeeping mission in Myanmar for all sorts of relatively obvious reasons to do with the way that peacekeeping missions work. But the question I think that Minister Win Myat-ae was posing to us is, well, what is the right response? We can watch, we can observe, we can hope that journalists and the media continue to keep Myanmar in the public domain. But what is the response beyond that? Minister Aung Myo Min was talking about the financial response that might need to be made. I think there's both a moral and a political question that flows from what Dr. Win Myat-ae was saying. The moral question is, what is our response as individuals? The political response is, what is our expectation, especially in countries like ours, where we have the extraordinary privilege of democracy? What is it that we expect of our countries in that context? We could potentially explore that in a moment. I'm going to turn around to our friends. Do we have anybody on? Yeah. Can we go back to Dr. Win Myat-ae? Or do we go to Mr. Okay. That's perhaps a good point then to bring in our representative from the European Parliament, who has been waiting very patiently in Brussels. I'm delighted to be able to introduce the Honourable Giuliano Pisapia, Member of the European Parliament. Sir, the floor is yours. Thank you for your patience. I wonder if I'm allowed to ask a quick question myself of some of the young people who are here. Would that be all right? I'm sure you're all thinking about these issues. What do you think governments should do when we see human rights abuses on this scale? It's a really hard question. Your professor is looking at me. It's a really hard question, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts. As young people today, you see your governments. We just had the COP26, we've just had Asean, we've just had the United Nations General Assembly. What do you think governments should do? Is nothing an acceptable answer? Is someone going to be brave? Someone going to be brave?
maybe speaking about these problems in the schools and integrate these problems in the programs in schools could be something, because we don't talk much about what's happening around the world. We have programs, we study what we have rightly to study, but also I think it would be important to give students education about current issues happening around the world, also about COP26, for example, as you mentioned.
Thank you. It's never easy to speak in a public forum like this, so thank you very much for being brave. A little bit of a challenge there to your professor, that these issues need to be brought into school more. They certainly weren't remotely when I was at school a long time ago. I think one of the things we've seen in this situation is a remarkable upsurge in the voices of young people. They are asking for help. They're asking for, I think, first of all, as actually Minister Amin has already said, they're asking for other young people around the world to pay attention. That's probably the first duty, isn't it? To hear and to understand. I mean, that's a challenge for educators, for sure. Going on from that, and I think you're right, when an election is taken away from people, when a military just says, no, we don't accept that result, is there something that the international community should be able to do? Minister, were you expecting the military to do this?
Yeah, frankly saying that I didn't expect it could happen. Actually, I was preparing my lecture with a student on the day. We are using a Zoom. We're talking about planning my lecture. I think my talk was about teaching human rights in the classroom. Very ironic. But I woke up, and because it was early in the morning. My friend from Naypyidaw called me that there's a military attempt, a coup. I said, I was shocked because I didn't expect. I know that they're not happy with the result of the elections, and they would discredit the result of the elections, and they would make lots of problems, like always they did, against the NLD. So I didn't expect. So I was a big shock. And then usually in Myanmar, the attempt coup never come good luck. It's all the misfortune. It's, right after the coup, as I expected, I had the news that military start arresting the leaders and send the the military tracks and, small armor cars to the street of Naypyidaw and put many people under house arrest. So personally, I feel so bad, not because I missed my class. I feel so bad for the future of the country. You can imagine when I was your age, I was 22 when military staged a coup. I spent 23 years in exile, staying far from my family. I live in the jungle. I live as a refugee. I was arrested by the Thai police because I did not have any document. But I got a chance to study. So I spent most of my time because my dream is to come back to Myanmar and then to build the country where all human rights are prevailed. So all my dream was totally crushed, so bad. So I didn't expect, I was shocked. But
I think sorrow, sadness is not a way of remedy. This is a challenge we face. We need to face. You have only two things: is you were, flee, stay, flee the situation, or float. Playing that with that, according to the situation, or fight. So my way is always I continue my fighting. Now, but I cannot pick up arms like 1988, and due to my health situation, I cannot survive like many young people. So I'm thinking, what is the best way? So all my knowledge, experience, and my commitment for human rights, I will continue by mobilizing the people to continue their struggles, by giving my knowledge of human rights so people in the country understand how their rights has been violated and fight for their rights. So I decided to continue by all means. So this is the generation, passed by. Pass your knowledge, experience, and sacrifice to the one. So I think this is the way. I was shocked, but I never surrender. I never give up.
Thank you, sir. I was in Naypyidaw on the day of the coup. Naypyidaw is the, if you don't mind me saying so, somewhat unlovely capital of Myanmar, once described to me as Las Vegas without the culture. And ironically, that weekend before the coup, we had decided to devote our attention to education. The weeks ahead were going to see the publication of a national education plan that would have, well, had various intentions, but one of which was to try to bring education to particularly refugee and displaced communities where some young people, there had been 3 generations where young people had received no education at all, where there was a school building in some of the refugee camps, but they'd simply been shuttered. And it really felt, I remember that weekend, but it really felt as if we were going to break in and bring some kind of education to those immensely vulnerable and distressed communities. And on the Sunday evening, I finished writing the preface to the document, and we sent it in to the Ministry of Health. And honestly, anybody, I think there were lots of things going on, but it was very hard to believe that the military really would take power once again. There were some people, one of them is in this room, who did predict it, and they turned out to be absolutely right. I didn't predict it, like the minister, honestly. I went to bed on Sunday night thinking that tomorrow would be another day. When there was an armoured personnel carrier parked outside the hotel on the Monday morning, I kind of realised that the world had changed. Actually, the biggest sign was that the internet had been switched off. That was when we really knew things had changed. I was very lucky to get out. My closest friend is in prison, as some of you know. And I think in my own smaller way, but like the minister, when you see something like that, when it happens around you, when your friends are arrested, when they're killed, the moral compulsion to carry on the fight becomes overwhelming. I don't know if we are in a position to, we should shortly, yeah? Okay. The moral compulsion in that circumstance becomes overwhelming. One of my closest friends, I don't think he'd mind being mentioned in this forum, would he, Larry? One of my closest friends is Professor Sean Turnell, an Australian economist, a lovely guy. I think you've met him, yeah. Minister. He was in Myanmar to write the COVID recovery plan to support Myanmar colleagues in creating a viable economic future for that country. To be thrown into jail for something like that, I think, is a truly awful thing. And while there have been some prisoner releases, and those are really good news, when one's friends are being held in those kinds of circumstances, the moral compulsion to continue does become overwhelming. Now, I think we may be ready to bring in a further witness. Are we going to try Mr. Pisapia again? Fantastic. So we will try and connect to Brussels and hear from the Honourable Giuliano Pisapia, MEP. I will eventually get his name pronounced right. Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to our conversation today.
Buongiorno a tutti, non so se si sente. Allora, innanzitutto
Sì,
un saluto a tutti e un ringraziamento a chi ha organizzato questo evento di riflessione e soprattutto di prospettive per il futuro, per un tema che ci sta particolarmente caro. Grazie quindi al Comune di Parma, che in queste giornate ha dato segnali di grandi capacità di cambiamento, di attenzione ai temi dei cittadini, oltre ai temi della che sempre spesso difficili ma importanti. Questa settimana di scambi, di dibattiti e di incontri sulla situazione in Myanmar, con la partecipazione di persone di livello che provengono anche da realtà e da territori diversi, sono già di per sé un messaggio chiaro e importante alla giunta militare birmana. Sono iniziative che dimostrano la forte solidarietà al popolo birmano e a tutti coloro che lottano per un Myanmar libero e democratico. Perché sui diritti, sulla libertà, sulla democrazia non si può mai arretrare, bisogna sempre avere il coraggio di andare anche contro chi oggi si sente potente, ma speriamo domani non avrà la forza di resistere rispetto alla richiesta forte di democrazia. Dopo le relazioni molto interessanti che ho ascoltato, a parte qualche problema di collegamento, credo che il mio contributo può essere quello relativo a cosa sta facendo l'Unione Europea, in particolare il Parlamento Europeo, e soprattutto quello che già è stato fatto per dare un segnale alla dittatura del Myanmar che così non si può andare avanti, che bisogna modificare, bisogna ritornare alla democrazia. Come sapete sicuramente in Unione Europea c'è il grosso problema dell'unanimità da parte dei componenti del Consiglio europeo. Basta un unico paese che fa parte dell'Unione Europea che si oppone, non si riesce a fare passi avanti. Ecco, in questa occasione invece c'è stata grande unità, grande convinzione, grande capacità di far diventare efficace quello che spesso si dice a voce, ma poi non si concretizza nei fatti. I governi e le istituzioni europee hanno su questo tema lavorato bene e si sono impegnati per dare una risposta forte, efficace e unitaria. oltre al rafforzamento, al mantenimento e al rafforzamento delle misure già esistenti prima del colpo di Stato, come l'embargo sulle armi, il divieto di esportazione di beni a duplice uso, l'Unione Europea ha approvato ben 3 livelli di sanzioni nei confronti di chi oggi malauguratamente governa il Myanmar, non con la democrazia ma con la dittatura. Il congelamento dei beni, il divieto di destinare fondi europei che già oggi sono applicati a 43 persone, tra cui i massimi vertici militari dell'attuale governo. Con loro non si discute, non possono più avere i contributi dell'Unione Europea. E vengono anche bloccati dagli aiuti che venivano dati in passato 6 entità, tra cui i più grandi conglomerati e enti controllati dallo Stato. Sono stati tutti congelati o sospesi tutti i fondi e contributi al governo e alla giunta militare. Però nel contempo l'Unione Europea ha pensato anche a chi soffre, ai deboli, e quindi invece rispetto alle persone, ai soggetti, alle istituzioni che purtroppo oggi e continua a dare il proprio contributo. Voglio ricordare che nel 2021 l'Unione Europea ha stanziato oltre 24 milioni di euro in aiuti umanitari per far fronte alle necessità immediate delle comunità sfollate e colpite dalla violenza di chi attualmente governa il paese. Quindi dare sì contributi, ma con la certezza e con la garanzia che vadano a chi ha bisogno, non vadano a chi ha fatto della democrazia qualche cosa che non esiste più. Cosa possiamo fare ancora? Purtroppo, come era prevedibile, le mobilitazioni democratiche non hanno finora avuto o non sono riuscite ancora a far fare un passo indietro ai militari e ai golpisti. Proprio per questo l'Europa, e non solo l'Unione Europea, può e ha il dovere di fare di più. Il Parlamento europeo ha già fatto 2 risoluzioni molto dure che hanno avuto una stragrande maggioranza al Parlamento europeo proprio per dare aiuti a chi ha bisogno e soprattutto fare tutto il possibile perché ritorni la democrazia in Myanmar. Cosa dobbiamo fare adesso? Ho detto quello che abbiamo fatto, chiaramente sintetizzando. Dobbiamo continuare ad aumentare gli aiuti umanitari e i finanziamenti alle organizzazioni della società civile che ogni giorno lottano per la democrazia. Dobbiamo dargli un aiuto concreto, non solo la solidarietà, che è importante, non solo parlarne come stiamo facendo oggi per far conoscere la situazione a chi non la conosce, ma anche dare un contributo di carattere economico per dargli la possibilità di risposte a chi mina la democrazia o ha minato la democrazia. Dobbiamo quindi creare anche più momenti come questi importanti, quindi veramente ringrazio per le organizzate, per far conoscere una realtà di cui si parla troppo poco. È invece importante che si sappia. Dobbiamo continuare a impegnarci in tutte le sedi internazionali per difendere i diritti del popolo birmano e per punire i responsabili dei crimini. Come ci insegnano i processi di riconciliazione nazionale in Europa, sia nel dopoguerra che più recentemente in Irlanda del Nord o nell'ex Jugoslavia, non vi può essere una pace duratura senza giustizia. E non ci può essere giustizia se c'è qualcuno che comanda e soprattutto comanda da solo, nel senso che mina l'autonomia indipendente della magistratura, dei partiti politici, degli orientamenti anche diversi da tutti i punti di vista. Per questo motivo il lavoro svolto dall'ONU con i suoi inviati speciali del meccanismo investigativo indipendente è importante, così come è importante l'iniziativa dell'Associazione Internazionale di Avvocati, che è fondamentale e vanno sostenuti appieno. Ecco, io credo di aver un po' riassunto in questa giornata un po' difficile delle comunicazioni quello che stiamo facendo, quello che abbiamo fatto. Dico che non dobbiamo mollare, dobbiamo far conoscere, ripeto, scusate per l'importante perché questi momenti di riflessione sono veramente determinanti, per poi far conoscere via via a un mondo sempre più ampio chi forse non sa neppure cos'è accaduto in questi anni in Myanmar. Noi ci siamo, noi ci saremo come Parlamento europeo e faremo tutte, continueremo a fare di tutto affinché le decisioni del Parlamento europeo non siano bloccate talvolta o troppo spesso capita da un singolo paese che si oppone alle importanti decisioni di l'unica per il vostro impegno, grazie per la vostra presenza, noi ci siamo, noi ci saremo.
So thank you very much indeed for that intervention. It answers actually directly the question we were discussing earlier. What is it that the international community can do in the face of such crises? And so you mentioned, I think, many of the key areas, sanctions being very important, the prevention of foreign aid from flowing into the wrong places and supporting the wrong governments. Sanctions, of course, both against individuals, so-called Magnitsky sanctions, but also companies. Support for vulnerable groups and for those trying to confront the military regime. The kind of money being described there in terms of support for displaced people, 24 million euros, that, if it's well spent, makes an immense difference to the lives of many. And then that emphasis on the continued role of the United Nations. So thank you very much indeed for that. Now, no, we're not going to do what I thought we were going to do. I don't think at this point, do we have Dr. Winmiate still online? Or are we going to? No, I don't think we do. Okay. So should we take a break and then go to Tom Andrews at 12:30? I think let's take a break for 10 minutes. I can only apologise for the continued confusion. We are going to hear from the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Myanmar. So he will be able to respond to the point that's been made about the importance of the United Nations role. I wonder if might just say a little bit about COVID. Minister, would we be able to talk for a few minutes together about COVID while we're waiting for that? The reason I wanted to raise the issue of COVID is because I personally think that the pandemic represents an existential threat to Myanmar. I was in Myanmar during the first waves of COVID, and although many people did sadly lose their lives, the government was able to deal with some of the problems of that pandemic quite successfully. Since the coup, that has not been so, and we honestly don't know how many people have died and lost their lives or been ill from the pandemic. Right now, there are various vaccine efforts trying to be pushed forward, but I think there's a real risk of a fourth wave of the pandemic reaching Myanmar and having really dreadful consequences in that country. Minister, would you be able to offer a few thoughts on COVID and the international response?
Yes. I mentioned a little bit in my first presentation about the COVID, the first wave in the country. So, like I mentioned, that Myanmar is not a rich country, and no experience of this, countering public health situation this is epidemic situation. But during the first wave, it's a ground very, very lovely and wonderful cooperation and coordination between the government and the civil society, even though we have so many challenges. Civil societies and the public health services join in hands together with the military, with the government for protection, treating, and also so other measures. So it was successful, even though it was not so perfect. Because that's COVID issue is one is the health issues. So whenever we talk about health, like one speaker mentioned about right to health. Right to health is very important for accessibilities of the medicines and availability of the medicines, and also quality of the medicines, and also the acceptability of the medicine and treatment. So it is not highly perfect, but for the Myanmar standard, it went well. Some in other respect is the restriction of fundamental rights under the COVID, the rule of law and protection of civil and liberty of the people inside the country under the name of security and health. So that's how, as a human rights activist and defenders, I stand up for some kind of, civil and political rights violation by the law enforcement officer, because sometimes they took, they used the COVID as the reasons to restrict the freedom of movement and also right to information, things like that. And some discrimination taking place during the COVID, even though government did their best. Because in Myanmar, during that time, some areas, especially in Yakai and in Rohingya areas, internet was totally shut down. It was because of the military operation before the COVID, but it's make a big impact to the people in that remote area who have no knowledge about how to start the spread of COVID. The right to information and right to write information is a big issue during the time. So, but we did it. But when that wave came, it is military try to stage a coup and try to control everything. They used the COVID as a weaponry to stop the political defiance and demonstrations. In the first wave, my HE minister, Dr. Zoe Su, and his whole ministry sacrificed their life in taking part in their fight against the COVID. But they no longer want to cooperate during the military time, because many of the health workers are brutally treated, and they decided CDM. Many of them are civil disobedient movement people. But military start using the military take a kind of punishment towards the health workers. So they arrested. They confiscate some of the medicines and the oxygen. How can we say cycling? Yeah, oxygen things, because they don't want the health workers operating and giving medical assistance to the people. So that they make it that kind of measure to stop to using COVID as a weaponry. So Myanmar people are double challenge. One is coup. Second one is COVID. So during this 2 C's, people are suffering and lots of things. But international cooperation, it was great in this first wave, but the limited the COVID vaccination and medical assistance during the military. because as the NUG, we didn't want to give a legitimacy to the military, and we don't want the military to handle all this kind of, health assistance and COVID, vaccination, because we don't trust them. So that, but there's some, INGOs and COVID have kind of, contract for delivering the COVID vaccination in the areas. But access to the ethnic run area is very limited because the military did not allow that kind of, humanitarian assistance towards ethnic areas where it is controlled by the ethnic areas. But our NUG, headed by Dr. Zoe So, we have three, principles of this kind of humanitarian and COVID assistance. One is people first. So the people should be the first priority for this kind of thing without giving legitimacy, without giving any kinds of political, public relations, reputation to the military. Second, equivalence. So NUG should be consultant, and the advisors of the NUG, based on the people's situation, should be well respected by any humanitarian groups. And then transparency is the third principle. People have right to know, and all the COVID funds, programs, and supply should be transparent so that we can monitor not single vaccination is exploited or abused by the military. So this is way between.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think the point about the weaponization of COVID is well made. That becomes a tool of oppression if it's used in a particular way by governments. One of the saddest things I think I've seen were pictures of the oxygen pipes that one of my charities had installed in the country's largest hospital being stripped out so that the pipes could be taken to somewhere else, place unknown. I don't know how many people lost their lives as a result of that decision after the coup to strip out what had been put in. But there have been signs of hope around COVID, and the Minister is, I think, absolutely right to mention the cooperation between ethnic health organisations and the NUG through the COVID task force, bringing real opportunity for some of the most vulnerable and deprived communities. We're now in the very happy position to be able to hear from His Excellency Tom Andrews, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar. Good afternoon, sir, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so very much. Am I coming through?
We can hear you clearly, sir.
Okay. It's an honor to join this panel of very distinguished speakers at this forum where people committed to human rights, democracy, and fear convene to discuss the nightmare that has befallen the people of Myanmar. Thank you, Municipality of Palma, and to all forum members for making this event possible and for inviting me. My only regret is that I am participating remotely and not able to enjoy the beauty, the wonderful food, and the cultural richness of this wonderful city and region. I am certain that my fellow panelists have described the living hell that has become life in Myanmar for most of its citizens. I have had the privilege to speak with scores of people in Myanmar whose lives have been upended by this crisis. As I told the United Nations General Assembly a few weeks ago, the people of Myanmar are their country. But as I also told the delegates to the General Assembly, people of Myanmar also care. And if so, whether they make a genuine difference. Many, I dare say most in world and the United Nations do not care. That is why the statement that you are making through this event is so.
Sir, I'm going to ask you just to pause. I'm afraid we are having some challenges
Several months
technically.
ago, Myanmar have experienced escalating human rights in time. They have witnessed a grossly disproportionate response by the international community. So I delivered a simple plea from the people's unfolding catastrophe and then translated here into meaningful action. As you and the organizers of this forum recognize, there is a global responsibility to address this crisis. And it is insufficient to pass it off to those who lack the will or the capacity to take the requisite action, particularly given the scope of the atrocities that are ongoing. As I documented in a comprehensive written report to the United Nations, since the February 4th of the Myanmar military against with well over 1,200 civilians murdered, over with many tortured, including dozens who were tortured to death. I received credible reports of children being tortured and abused by junta forces. At least 100 journalists lost their freedom because they had the core doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals attacked, harassed, and arrested, even as Myanmar suffers through a healthcare crisis. Family members, those stopped by security forces, including very young children, courageously continue to protest against these gross and unrelenting violations of human rights, and a belief that the world does not care enough to act, have led some to take desperate measures, including picking up what are often militaries in the region. Many have formed a network of which is called the People's Defense Forces, and the National Unity Government is declaring a defensive war against the junta forces, and the junta has responded in many instances.
I'm really sorry. We tried very hard to get that to work, but we're not successful.
I get a message from the colleague.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have to sometimes accept that the forces of whatever controls the internet are against us. I'm very sorry that we weren't able to hear from Tom Andrews because he's a really engaging and interesting speaker. We kind of heard little bits from various people online, but actually probably the best one we heard was from Brussels, which was great and interesting. I would like to express my huge thanks to His Excellency U Aung Myo Min for answering questions on almost every ministry of the NUG, including his own. Thank you, sir, very much indeed. And thank you very much for your patience in sticking with us while we tried to resolve these issues. Good afternoon, and thank you for your attendance.
Thank you so much.
I think we're allowed to finish half an hour early.